Well, as we told you in the introduction, when we study law, we're studying facts, logic, and reason. But a lot of people make a mistake. They don't understand law. They think it's complicated, and they don't really understand the simple definition of law. So let's take down the definition of law. Law is a set of rules and regulations which govern conduct and the observance of which may be enforced in a court of law. So what did we say? We said that law is simply rules and regulations. What can we say about rules and regulations? Well, we could say that most of us don't like them. We don't like to be told what to do. We all feel that we're smart enough to know what we should do. And it's our natural tendency to resist rules and regulations. Now, because of our tendency to resist rules and regulations, the law must reflect who we are, so that the rules and regulations reflect our life and what we believe. Now, what I have for you to read allows you to understand this in a context. Posted will be a case called Regina versus Dudley and Stevens. Regina versus Dudley and Stevens is a real case. Now, in law school, we don't use texts. What we use is cases. We learn the law by studying cases. This is a real case. It's about some men. It's based in England. It's about some men who are lost at sea, who go days without food or water, and any possibility in their mind of being rescued. Now, these men decide that in order to live, one of them must die in order for the rest to live, so that this person, the rest, can eat this person and survive. Now, in the days of England, a seafaring nation, this was an accepted practice. So when you read this case, read what we told you, objective facts. What happens is that they decide that one of them must die so that the rest can live. So one dies and the rest eat him, and because they ate him, they all survive. Now, the question is, when you read the case, is did they commit murder or did they do what they had to do? Now, many of you will jump to a quick conclusion because you say you don't care how desperate you are, you would never eat another human being. But think about it. You've never really been hungry. Hunger for us is a state of mind. Many of you will open the refrigerator and it'll be full of food and you'll say there's nothing to eat. So you don't know what desperate hunger is. And if you look at it objectively, you would try to understand what these men went through. The other thing people would say is that if you look at this case, one of the things you must understand that if the men did not eat the boy, they would have died. The question is, would you have just died, or would you have taken everything you could to survive? Now, when you look at this case, I want you to also look at what we have as three theories of law. One theory is based on Aristotle, Greek philosopher. The other is based on St. Thomas Aquinas, a religious leader and thinker and philosopher. And the other is based on Friedrich Karl von Savigny, a philosopher and thinker. Now, if you look at these three theories of law, under one theory, these men would be innocent. On another theory, these men would be guilty. And remember now, for law to be effective, it must reflect who we are. And therefore, when we look at law, we know that in our life there are all kinds of rules and regulations. But breaking them is not breaking the law. So, for example, all of us have been taught good manners. Now, when we exercise bad manners, they don't put us in jail because that's not a law. So, in order for people to follow this, because nobody follows you around and says, you got to do this, you got to do this, it's upon us to obey the law, to obey these rules and regulations. Now, what makes us obey them? Well, what makes us obey them is that if they're reasonable, if they make sense. So, for example, if the law makes sense and we think it's right, we will obey it. But if the law we think is stupid, we will ignore it and disobey it. The purpose of law is to prevent chaos. So if everyone disobeyed any law they didn't like, we'd have nothing but chaos. So, what is to be reasonable? Well, if you think about it, what makes law reasonable is what is the basis of law. Now think. We know the government has all these laws against the use of marijuana, weed, or grass, whatever you call it. But we all know that you can go anywhere in this country, not know a soul, but you can find weed, grass, or marijuana. People ignore the law. Now, why are they ignoring it? Because they think it's unreasonable. People believe that if I sit in my house by myself or with some of my friends and I want to smoke it, that's up to me, and it's not the state's business. That's why the state has difficulty enforcing the law. Now, let me tell you about a law that most of you don't know about, but you probably should. Most of you don't know that it's a crime to have sex without being married. Oh, let me repeat that. I know your heads went up, because I know that some of you have broken this law, some of you have not broken it, and some of you have been trying to break it every day. Now, most of you don't understand this law, and you ask yourself, that's a stupid law. What is the government doing in my bedroom? Well, if you look at the law on its face, it seems unreasonable. But if you look at the law objectively, then you know that a law like this, which means that if you do this in New York, you can go to jail for 3 years, and if you do it in Michigan, you can go to jail for 5 years. Now, you know the law, there is no excuse. How many of you are going to obey it? Well, I can tell you, very few of you. Some of you are going home to break the law as soon as you can. Some of you haven't broken the law, but you keep trying. And some of you are serial breakers of this law. Now, why don't you follow the rules and regulation? Because in your mind, this law is stupid and it don't make sense. And therefore, you feel that you have no need to obey it. But if we analyze this law, then we know it's a proper law, it makes sense, and its purpose is real. Why does it make sense? Well, we all know that sex without responsibility can lead to trouble. For example, children. If these people don't take care of the children, you and I have to. It's a burden on us. So, the other thing is that the basis of any nation is families. If you study history, you'll notice that those societies that have survived over the years and the centuries are those that have strong family ties. Countries where the family has broken down, the country has fallen apart. If you allow people to have the benefit without the responsibility, what will happen? Ours will fall apart. So on its face, the law seems stupid, but if you analyze it, it makes sense because it's necessary for the preservation of our society. Now, how do we make laws reasonable? Again, it must reflect who we are. Now, if you think about it, when you read this case, one of the reasons when the men are brought to trial is that they don't believe they're guilty. They believe that a law that requires them to die, because if they hadn't eaten this person, they would have died, is a law that don't make sense, and they don't have to obey it. Well, if everybody chooses which law they want to follow and which law they don't, then we'd have chaos. And the purpose of law, and what is that purpose? Well, law has two main purposes. The first purpose is to maintain order. Why is order important? Because we know that when there's chaos, nothing can be accomplished. Just think about it. The second point of law, is not only to avoid chaos, but to use it to promote certain social objectives. In other words, when the law is made to make us do something that we normally would not do. So, for example, some of you are very lucky, you receive financial aid. Well, do you think the government really thinks you're smart? Or is the government giving it to you because of another purpose? Well, that purpose is that a great society is an educated society. We know that societies that progress have educated people. So the government gives you this money to promote this. So law, two purposes: maintain order, promote certain social objectives. Now, if we look at law, then we need to know what are the source of law. Now, law has many sources, and if you read your textbook, you'll see, but it has two main sources. The first is called morality. This is the source of our law. What is morality? Morality is our basic sense of right and wrong. No matter where we come from, what society we were born into, what our upbringing was, we all have a basic sense of right and wrong. For example, I think all of us would agree it's wrong to eat other people. But morality can be tricky. What you may think is immoral, I may think is perfectly all right. Morality is shaped by religion, philosophy, life experiences, and our sense of morality can be difficult. Just look at the struggle that we have in this country over gay rights. Some people think gay rights is an issue involving morality. Other people believe that gay rights is an issue involving the right for people to choose to love whoever they want. So some people would say you're evil if you believe in it. Some people would say you're not. So morality can be tricky. The second source of law is called empirical knowledge, E-M, empirical knowledge. And what that is knowledge gained from experience. As we live, we learn. As we learn, it shapes our life. But empirical knowledge alone can't be the basis of law, because two people can have the same experience and come away with different conclusions. For example, somebody tells you, you gotta eat at this restaurant. The food is excellent. You'll love it. And then you go to the restaurant, you eat the same thing they did, and you come away with, this must be the worst restaurant in the world. I almost died eating this food. I would never tell anybody to come here. Now, two people had the same experience, but they came away with different conclusions. For law to work, it must be a combination of the two. So if you take a continuum, which is just a straight line, and at each end you put, one end you put morality, and at the other end you put empirical knowledge, at each end it would be an extreme. What do we know about extremes? Extremes are dangerous. Think, for example, if you just keep eating to be eating, not because you're hungry, but to be eating. What happens? You get sick, because eating too much is an extreme. So therefore, for law to be effective, it has to avoid extremes, because people believe extremes are not reasonable. So for law to be effective, it has to come somewhere in the middle, a combination of the two. Now, in our next class, we will talk about the philosophies concerning the different types of law. Those philosophies are in your book, and you may want to read them. They are natural law, historical law, analytical law, sociological law, religious law, command law, and economics law. In our next class, we will talk about what those mean and the primary source of law in the United States.